Investigations to clarify the circumstances and those responsible for the accident that cost the lives of 55 migrants and left dozens of injured in Chiapas in southern Mexico, although they continue, do not report significant advances. Salvadorans demand justice 40 years after the massacre of Mozote. The Russian government warned about the buildup of military forces of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Greece. Hi, this is From the South. I am your news anchor, Diego Martin, from the TeleSUR studios in Havana. We begin with the news. Investigations to clarify their circumstances and responsible for the accident that cost the lives of 55 migrants and that left dozens injured in Chiapas, southern Mexico, continue, although still they do not report significant progress. Hundreds of people continue to arrive in the town of Chiapas de Corzo to inquire about the situation of family members who were traveling in the crashed unit. With the help of the Chiapaneco people and the regional and national authorities, some have already been able to identify the deceased relatives and meet with the injured ones. The Mexican government announced the creation of a task force against a network of human traffickers responsible for the accident in Chiapas and has provided the survivors with clothing, hygiene articles, and lodging and means to communicate with their families. According to the latest report from medical authorities, 20 people have been discharged and 75 others remain hospitalized. The majority are both dead and injured, come from Guatemala and Honduras, but also have been identified people from Dominican Republic and Ecuador. After Mexican Chancellor Marcelo Ebrard announced the creation of an action group against a network of human traffickers responsible for the accident in Chiapas, the authorities indicated that, although for the moment there is no progress, investigations continue. As it has been said before, this is an unprecedented migratory crisis in the region. The foreign ministers of Mexico and Guatemala announced the creation of a regional commission to investigate the human trafficking network responsible for the accident that left at least 55 migrants dead in Chiapas. The tragedy occurred 3 days after the reactivation of a U.S. program that forces migrants to wait in Mexico for a response to their asylum applications. The transfer of migrants by truck is one of the most common and feared methods of transportation. Mexican President López Obrador said that the migration problem cannot be solved by coercive measures, but by opportunities for work and well-being. He added that people don't leave their villages for pleasure, they do it out of necessity. The countries of the region, mainly at Guatemala's proposal, are announcing tonight the creation of an immediate action group against a network of human traffickers responsible for the tragedy in Chiapas, to identify, investigate, apprehend, and bring to justice the members and commanders of the transnational criminal organization responsible for this human tragedy. To follow up and care for the victims, to work together in the investigation process allows us to find those responsible and to logistically coordinate the process of repatriating the remains of those who unfortunately have died. The Colombian Congress included and approved an article in the anti-corruption law which, according to experts, will put a gag on the press and free speech for the benefit of public officials who cannot be investigated or questioned for their actions. Controversial and article was approved within the anti-corruption law passed in both the Senate and the House, which would allow limiting the exercise of the press in alleged cases of corruption related to public officials. The Congress of Colombia has just approved an article that, for us, is the gag law. Who benefits from this article? Corrupt politicians, what happened with Karen Abudinen, what happened with Jennifer Arias, what has happened with so many corrupt politicians of the government coalition. That's why they want to censor the press. That's why they put this article. They are afraid that journalists investigate and denounce. This is intended to prohibit the media from filing complaints if there is no conclusive evidence against a person or public official under investigation. The author of this article is Cesar Lordui, who belongs to the party Radical Change, an ally of the Democratic Center, the ruling party. The initial content of this article proposed imprisonment and a fine for those who, by slander and defamation, would attempt to attack or obstruct the functions of a public servant. However, before the vote, the economic and criminal penalty was eliminated.
se logró eliminar la sanción tanto económica como penal.
The whole root of the project is governmental. It is parties related to the government, as the final vote showed. The vote that was finally imposed in the chamber and demonstrates an authoritarian character, very close to dictatorial. Even in front of microphones, it seems otherwise, but it is a totalitarian character of the government that took the courts, that took the Congress, that took the instances of the control agencies, and now even wants to take the freedom of expression. Finally, the approved article allows a suspension or cancellation of legal status of any organization of the person or persons who have defamed or slandered the public servant or former public official or his or her family. This article was approved by 59 yes votes and 53 nay in its last debate in the House. Now we adopt everything we criticize in Colombia. The journalists cannot denounce corruption because supposedly that is fatal, so somehow they live saying that they are for a transparent country, they are for a country without corruption, for a country of freedoms, and it bothers them that they are questioned. And the sad thing is that journalism denounces and nothing happens. Justice does nothing, the president does nothing, he is indolent.
El periodismo denuncia y no pasa nada, porque la justicia no hace nada. El presidente no hace nada, es indolente.
For the moment, the conciliation of the text approved by both the Senate and the Chamber is expected before going to presidential sanction, and it is there where some analysts assure that it will not pass, and if it does, it will be rejected by the Constitutional Court since it clearly violates Article 20 of the Colombian Constitution, which guarantees everyone the freedom to express their thoughts and opinions, to inform and receive truthful and impartial information.
TeleSUR, Bogotá, Colombia.
And also in Colombia, farmers from different regions demonstrated in front of the Ministry of Agriculture to continue demanding the modification of Decree 596 of June 1st, 2021 of Law 2071 of 2020, considering it discriminatory for small and medium farmers. The demonstrations that have been taking place since December 9th stress that the farm workers want to be heard by the government, which guaranteed the relief of their debts through the established decree. It provides economic aid for the relief of their debts with different entities such as a fund for the financing of the agricultural sector and the agrarian bank. However, the demonstrators assured that their main concern is a possible loss of their lands, considering that so far the government has not given them any kind of guarantees. We'll be right back after this very short break. Don't go away. Hi, welcome back to From the South. Salvadorians demand justice 40 years after the massacre of Mozote. Overcome by a sense of sadness, hundreds of Salvadorians gathered to commemorate the 40th anniversary of the Mozote massacre. It took place between December 9th and 13th, 1981, when units of the Salvadorian Army led by the Counterinsurgency Battalion Atlacatl, which had been trained by the United States, launched the so-called Operation Rescue that killed more than 800 civilians. The government of El Salvador established in 2017 that at least 988 people, including 558 children, were killed there and in adjacent communities. Belgian priest Rogelio Poncil, who has supported the victims for 40 years, declared that between justice and reconciliation, he would choose the latter because it could offer the Salvadorian homeland the chance to achieve a new coexistence. However, survivors like Dorila Marquez say that even though their wounds are open, their hope is in justice. We will continue to fight for justice. It is a strong case and we must take to the last consequences. You obtained an international sentence from the Inter-American Court, and this is a great tool. We must continue to demand that the government comply with this sentence. The sentence and the reparation will not be fulfilled with acts of force, nor by bringing in the military or demolishing craft stalls in the village. The government of the United States handed over to a court in Morazan declassified documents on the massacre of Mozote committed in 1981 by the Army with the help of U.S. agents. The information was confirmed by Brendan O'Brien, chargé d'affaires of United States Embassy in San Salvador. The government of the United States handed over to a court in Morazan declassified documents on the massacre of El Mozote. The Washington official explained that the declassified U.S. government documents requested by the court in charge of the investigation were submitted, and said that many more would be provided in the future without specifying dates. The San Francisco's Gotera examining court is prosecuting a dozen retired military commanders, but the case, which is currently in the examining stage, is on hold. According to the United Nations Truth Commission report, in El Salvador between December 10th and 13th, 1981, units of the Atlacatl Battalion deliberately and systematically tortured and executed children, men and women in El Mozote and other neighboring areas. A state registry estimates the number of victims is at least 1,730. We remain in El Salvador. On Sunday, a new popular march was called for and against the administration of President Nayib Bukele. The opposition movement Bloc of Resistance and Popular Rebellion is leading the call to march against the administration, which they say has not done much for the working people and has persecuted the press, the academy, and the critical sectors of society. They also reject the approval of laws such as the one that makes Bitcoin a legal currency in the country, the centralization of municipal government funds, the expropriation of land, and the law on foreign agents, which is set to silence non-governmental organizations that evaluate progress in the country. On Friday, Iran achieved the first victory in Vienna by getting the European Troika to change its approach and decide to take on the drafts presented in the discussions on the Iranian nuclear agreement. Within the framework of the seventh round of the talks hosted in the Austrian capital, the Persian country had already submitted to the European parties involved in the nuclear deal 2 drafts on its position and proposals regarding the removal of sanctions, which were imposed by the United States after it pulled out of the nuclear deal signed in 2015, as well as Tehran's nuclear commitments. A source revealed that the 3 European signatories to the nuclear pact, namely the United Kingdom, France, and Germany, which initially refused to go along with the drafts, have decided to conduct negotiations on the basis of Iran's proposals. Tehran has made it clear that any negotiation requires lifting these measures. Talks resumed on November 29th with the aim of revitalizing the nuclear agreement. Meanwhile, the Special Political Committee of the United Nations General Assembly unanimously approved the permanent membership of Iran in the Scientific Committee of this organization for the study of the effects of atomic radiation. In November, after several rounds of negotiations on a draft resolution submitted by Australia, Iran's permanent representation to the United Nations in New York had announced that the Islamic Republic was able to change its position from observer to full membership in the committee, following the country's efforts to join it since 2011 and despite some opposition. The Special Board of the UN was created by the United Nations in 1955 to assess and report on the levels and effects of exposure to ionizing radiation. We have more stories coming up after this final short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Russian government warned about the buildup of military forces of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization in Greece. This Saturday, in declarations to the press, a Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov denounced deployment through the Alexandropolis port of NATO soldiers in its territory, which is increasing and is leading to the opening of new facilities for this organization. In the view of this situation, Moscow has strengthened the modernization of its military equipment and the improvement of its offensive and defensive capabilities as part of the defense of its sovereignty. The port of Alexandropolis is of serious strategic importance to Washington, apparently because it wants to strengthen its forces and those of NATO deployed in the Balkans and the Black Sea, very close to Russia's western flank. And Tunisians protested violence against women in the capital. Dozens of Tunisians gathered in central Tunis and held a silent march carrying placards and banners protesting violence against women and calling on the government to do more to enforce laws that will protect them from domestic violence. In 2017, the Tunisian parliament adopted the much-praised law on eliminating violence against women, but the state of the matter is more difficult when not on paper. Women continue to face an uphill struggle to obtain justice and ensure their personal safety. According to a survey from the Ministry of Women, at least 47% of female citizens who took part in the study experienced domestic violence and abuse in their lifetime. These numbers have only increased with the COVID-19 pandemic. The march seeks to raise awareness on support services for survivors of domestic violence, as well as to implement campaigns and public education programs to change social attitudes that encourage or legitimate violence against women. Now we go to India, where groups of farmers quit protest sites on the outskirts of the capital on Saturday and returned to their homes, marking the end of their year-long demonstrations against agricultural reforms. Farmers dismantled their informal shelters at the protest sites and began clearing long sections of roads around New Delhi, where they had been campaigning since November last year. The farmers' decision follows an announcement 3 weeks ago by Prime Minister Narendra Modi that his administration would repeal the 3 agricultural laws in the winter session of Parliament, a decision that was passed by both houses of the legislature. However, the leaders of the agrarian unions stated that they would meet again on January 15th to verify the fulfillment of their demands. The United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, warned about the increase of hunger in Latin America to the highest level since the year 2000. The organization's regional representative, Julio Verdeguer, pointed out that between 2014 and 2020, hunger in Latin America increased by 79%. He also pointed out that as a result of the economic crisis prompted by the COVID-19 pandemic, hunger affected almost 59.7 million people in Latin America and the Caribbean. The FAO official provided data on social inequality, highlighting a gap between men and women. In 2020, with the worsening of the crisis, 41.8% of women in the region and 32.2% of men will suffer some type of food inequality, which represents almost a 10% difference between genders. Latin America and the Caribbean urgently need to implement plans to generate an economic awakening based on integration and collaboration among the countries of the region. And the number of deaths rose to more than 100 after the most intense series of tornadoes in living memory hit several states of the United States. Kentucky, Arkansas, Tennessee, Illinois, and Missouri were the most affected states by the impact of the tornadoes, which, in addition to the deaths, left injuries and serious damage to infrastructure after more than 35 tornadoes, according to the National Weather Service, originated in the country. Due to the seriousness of the situation, President Joe Biden addressed the nation and assured that the search for survivors is still active. So it is likely that in the next hours, the numbers of dead and injured will be subject to changes. Biden also thanked the governors of the affected states for their efforts and highlighted the participation of the Security and Civil Protection Corps, who are helping the victims and keeping up the search and rescue efforts. In Italy, at least 3 people were killed and 6 are still missing after a gas explosion late on Saturday caused several residential buildings in the Sicilian town of Ravanusa to collapse. 2 apartment blocks in the town of 11,000 people were completely destroyed and several other buildings had partially collapsed in the blast. 2 women were pulled alive from the debris, with 7 people still missing, according to the local fire service. Rescue operations were still ongoing into Sunday morning, with search dogs brought in to aid firefighters. The cause of the blast is currently unknown and will be investigated in the coming days, local authorities said. We've come to the end of this news brief. Remember, you can find these and many other stories on our website at TeleSUR English. You can also follow us on social media for the latest news. We're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Dio Martin. Thanks for watching.